All right, we're live.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's call this meeting to order at 6:06. I'd like to welcome everyone to our joint meeting with the West Greenwich Town Council, the Exeter Town Council School Committee for a review and discussion of the 2021-22 school budget. As we're virtual, I'm going to go through and announce who's on the meeting in case we have anybody on a phone. So we have for school committee, we have members Allen, Pasillo, Monroe, McFadden, Green, and myself. For West Greenwich Town Council, we have Mark Turgi, Mark Boyer, Lee Kissinger, Tom Mulcahy, and the town manager, Kevin Breen. I don't know if I missed anybody from West Greenwich. From Exeter, we have, let's see, Dan Patterson, Michael LaFave, Olivia DiFrancesco. I'm not sure if we have Frank Marr. And I'm not sure if we have Cal Ellis. So, Exeter, can you confirm if Cal or Frank are on the call just for my minutes?
Cal is not available tonight, so he is not on the call. I don't know about Frank.
Okay.
Frank is here.
Frank is there. Okay. Cheryl, you can add Frank Marr to the minutes. Okay, let's see. We have our superintendent, James Aronakis. We have our director of administration, Bob Ross. We have our legal counsel, Andrew Hennius. Director of technology, Jeremy Taylor, who's hosting the meeting. And please tell me if I missed someone.
Someone just joined named Kerry.
Okay, I don't know who that is.
Could be a member of the public.
Yeah, it might be a member of the public. Okay. And, oh, I missed Maria Lawler. So Maria Lawler, treasurer for Exeter, is also on. Okay. All right, just a few housekeeping things. So if you could all just please keep yourselves muted, so we don't get any feedback on the mics. And if you'd like to be acknowledged, please use your raise hand function. If you're on the phone, use *9, *6, mutes and unmutes. And I just want to mention at the beginning of the meeting, everybody please be patient when you raise your hand, because when the superintendent goes through the budget, since there's so many people and it's virtual, I'd like Jim to go through his presentation and then we'll take questions and comments. So if you raise your hand, you can raise it at any time, but please know I see your hand. That goes for school committee members also. I see your hand. So if I don't call on you, I will acknowledge you just at the end of Jim's presentation. Okay, so let's go to, before the budget discussion, we do have a request from the town of Exeter to discuss the FY21 proportionate share of local funding to the school department. And I'm going to acknowledge one of the town council members from Exeter to take the lead on. It was your request that we put it on with both town councils present at the meeting. Just tell us who's speaking.
Is someone from the council going to speak to this, or do you want me to give the background on it? It's Paul.
Yeah, well, I asked if someone from the Exeter Town Council.
Claudine, please, if you don't mind, may I ask the town council?
No.
Can you hear us?
I'm running this meeting, and please put yourself on mute. I asked to recognize someone from the Exeter Town Council to speak on the topic.
Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you. Can you just?
Okay, we're having technical difficulty on this end.
Okay.
Dan Paxton, President of the Exeter Town Council.
Okay.
Thrown this on here in the event that it was going to be discussed. Right now, the council will be discussing this matter next Monday night at our monthly meeting, so really no action is going to be happening tonight on this issue.
Is there a reason you wanted it on the joint meeting?
I think we just threw that on there in case it came up to be covered under the Open Meetings Act, so.
Okay. All right, we will move on. Thanks, Dan.
Thank
Okay,
you.
we'll move on to our budget discussion for the 21-22 budget. And I'm going to turn it over to our superintendent, Jim Marinakis. Again, feel free to raise your hand, but I will acknowledge you when Jim finishes. Thank you.
Thanks, Claudine. Jeremy, can I share?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm also going to mute the town council at Exeter.
All right, thanks. All right, thanks everybody for joining. What I want to present tonight is just kind of how we got here, kind of a situation, and then I will share the spreadsheet that I typically share at the budget meetings that we have. Just as a reminder, we are still in the budget development process. I'm going to share with you where we started, where we currently are, and the things that we continue to monitor, steps that we still have to take to get the budget to its final stage. And budget adoption at the school committee level does not happen until the end of February. So this is really kind of a midway point between the time that the budget was initially presented to the school committee and what it will be finally when we get to the adoption stage. So let me just do the show. Okay. So I think it's important this year to look back at FY21, which is the year that we're currently in, because some of these things do impact where we stand at the current point in time. Just as a little history, the school committee and voter approved budget from 2019 was $33,387,864. And that was for the FY20 school year. And then for the FY21 school year, which is the year we're currently in May, the school committee approved a budget of $33,861,958. That's a 1.42% increase. However, we all know that the budget did not pass when it went to the voters in June. And so on August 11th, the school committee had to adopt a new budget, and that budget was set at $33,136,553, which is lower than where we were in FY20. And I'll briefly explain how that happened, just so that everybody is up to speed. The difference between what was requested and approved by the school committee in May and what was eventually adopted in August is about $725,405. And we're also operating at $251,311 less than where we were at in FY20. So the reason for that is that the towns level funded the prior year contributions, as we know, but we were also experiencing a very significant reduction in state aid. And with the level funding from the towns, it did not make up for all of the difference in what we were reduced by the state. And that's why our operating budget ended up being less than what it was in the prior year. So what did we do to balance the FY21 budget? We had a budget that was set, and we needed to reduce just over $725,405. And while there were some additional things that were done, I really just want to highlight the big ones. First, the school committee allocated an additional $220,900 from unassigned fund balance as an additional revenue to offset the expenses or to offset the impact to the taxpayers. In addition, we removed the school resource officer from the school's operating budget, and the expenses were shared by the member towns outside of the school operating budget. We had some significant reductions in athletics and clubs, which we knew we would be saving some money given the circumstance of the world, the pandemic. That has actually played out exactly as we thought it would. Many sports didn't run. Some of the seasons were reduced. So we had significant savings in referees and transportation and then those clubs and activities that just couldn't run at all. We eliminated one clerical position, and then we had 3 requests from elementary special subject teachers for leaves of absence, unpaid leaves of absence for the current school year. And we did not replace any of those requests, which we were able to do based on the schedule that we implemented at reentry. But in the meantime, we know that our students at the elementary school are currently not receiving art at either Wawaloom or Metcalf, and there is no music program at Wawaloom this year. Items 1, 2, 3, and 5, that's the allocation from the school committee from unassigned fund, the school resource officer, athletics and clubs, and the elementary specials teachers were 1-year only adjustments. All of those items, 2, 3, and 5, have been placed back into the budget request for FY22. So now let's talk again about FY21 in terms of reopening. So we know that over the summer, there was a lot of work that went into reopening the schools, and everyone anticipated that we would be looking for a supplementary budget request at some point during the school year, given what we knew would be some pretty significant increased costs. I wanted to just kind of go over the big items, where the additional costs came from, and how they were addressed. So additional custodial staff, lots of requirements around extra cleaning. We were able to work with our union to shift existing employees. This is the non-certified union. We shifted existing employees out of classification in lieu of layoff. We did not need all of the teacher assistants given the number of children that moved to distance learning for the year. So with their agreement, we shifted some of the teacher assistants to a cleaning position. We had to increase the hours for four employees, but all of those added costs were captured in one of the stimulus grants that we received. So the additional cost of custodial staff for us was $0. We had to add an extra transportation tier at the elementary schools because of the capacity limits of the bus. What we were able to do is adjust the start and end times for elementary students. And so with the added tier of busing, there were some additional costs. Those costs were offset by a move from the statewide transportation system to our local vendor, who worked with us to develop a plan for all of our students that went out of district, that need to be transported out of district. We had a pretty significant level of savings by moving from statewide to the local vendor. And then some of the additional costs for the extra tier were also captured in one of the stimulus grants. So in total, the added tier of busing cost us about $70,000. That's a rough number. We also had an increased need for PPE, protective equipment. We were able to purchase all of that equipment during FY20. So once we knew that we would have some money left over that was not used in FY20 because we were shut down for 3 months, we purchased all of the needs in FY20, which allowed us to get ahead of the supply and demand issue. And then we received reimbursement for most all of that equipment through one of the stimulus grants that we received. We knew that there would be a need for increased substitute teachers, and that's because the rules for reentry for staffing is that if there was any symptom, that person needed to stay home. So absenteeism would be an issue that we would be facing all year long, and it certainly has been a challenge. However, we did receive agreement from the union to reassign some of our existing staff for coverage purposes. So for example, the library teachers, the elementary specials. We also had an agreement where the expectation for teachers who were quarantined but well enough to teach would be remoting in from home, and then we would be able to put non-certified staff in the room just for supervision purposes. With those agreements, we are currently running at or below what we budgeted for substitutes, which is not what most other districts are experiencing. We knew that we needed increased supervision and screening. We have to screen every kid before entry, lots of supervision in terms of spacing and so forth. So we developed an agreement with the union to require daily duties for all certified staff. The contractual requirement is that they would have duties approximately 50% of the time. This year we have all staff in all schools doing a duty on a daily basis. No impact for us in terms of costs.
Jim, can you pause? Jim, can you
Yes.
pause for a second?
Yes.
Member McFadden, I need you to go on mute. There's feedback and it interferes with what we can hear.
I'm not having a problem. You're the person with the problem.
I'm also
Jeremy-
having a problem, which is why I keep muting you.
Jeremy, can you mute everybody, and then when they raise their hand, I can acknowledge them. Can you keep mute on?
Yes, I
Jeremy?
can do
Okay, so please mute everyone. Do not release anybody from mute unless I acknowledge them. And that will be after Superintendent Aronakis's presentation. Sorry, Jim.
Thank you. Okay, we did hire an additional psychologist. That's to address the increase in social emotional needs that, a lot of the statistics and data that we're hearing across the state, across the country are pretty alarming. So we did have to hire an additional staff member. However, we captured that full amount in one of the stimulus grants as well. We also gave parents the option of in-person learning, full distance learning, or a hybrid model, particularly at the elementary schools. And the way that those numbers came in, they didn't break out exactly perfectly and evenly. And in some grade levels, we actually had to add a classroom, and not because the overall number needed it, but because of the way that the kids broke out based on the parental requests. So we got some agreement to shift the roles of existing certified staff. We moved people out of their current certification and into a new certification. So for example, just as one example, our elementary library teacher at Wawaloom is now teaching a general education class for grades kindergarten and 1. So all of that was done, no cost. We had to add staff for teachers who have documented high-risk conditions requiring long-term absences. So in some districts, those teachers took long-term absences, being paid for their absences. We were able to have some agreement to shift the roles of existing certified staff out of their certification and out of seniority so that the high-risk teachers could be assigned to the distance learning classrooms to accommodate the needs based on parent requests. We were able to do that with existing staff, and we didn't have to hire anybody new. We also had many increased technology needs. What we did was we used some of the unexpended funds from 20 to buy out the computer lease that was expired. And that gave us the loaner devices that we needed to have in stock for the parents that chose remote learning. And then we had several new technology applications that were requested. A lot of that was based on surveys that we sent out to parents prior to reopening. So the buyout was we used unexpended money from FY20, but then we received reimbursement for about 60% of those costs through one of the stimulus grants, and all the other technology enhancements that we ordered also were captured through the stimulus grant. And then finally, air exchange. We knew that it was an issue, but it wasn't as significant at the start of the year because we opened up all the windows in all of the buildings and all of the classrooms. However, as it started to get colder, we were told that we needed to put HEPA filters in, particularly at Wawalum School. So we purchased 10 HEPA filter machines for each of the classrooms at Wawalum. And then we received a stock of additional filters, the machines from the state. The ones from the state were provided at no cost, and the 10 that we purchased, we captured in one of the stimulus grants. So in total, certainly there were other costs as well, but we managed reopening in a pretty creative way through some agreements with the unions and through the use of the stimulus money that we received. And at the end of the day, we are not in a position where we will be requesting any supplemental monies from the towns. And we are currently operating at budget for the current school year. I think we're within $10,000 of the actual budget number, according to the last report that was provided at the school committee meeting. So we have addressed all the reentry costs without the need for supplemental requests of the member towns. I know that was a huge concern around budget adoption time in the summer. And we're proud that we have successfully maintained in-person learning at every one of our schools since day one. We have had a couple of classrooms that had to go remote for short periods of time. We did close Wawalum for a couple of weeks at one point. But other than that, we are in person every day at every school. So now that kind of tells a little bit of the story about the beginning of the development process for FY22. So here are some of the considerations and challenges that we're facing. As I stated, those one-year only adjustments must be placed back into the budget. Athletics and clubs, for example, the school resource officer, that was a one-year agreement between the two towns to take it out and pay separate from the operating budget. That's been placed back in. And then all the elementary specials teachers, when we go back to the normal schedule, those are required because we want to provide those opportunities for our kids, but that's the time when the teachers of the grade levels get their contractual break period, their preparation period. We're also monitoring what's happening at the state because the state aid formula is still used to determine aid to the cities and towns. However, there's been a pretty significant impact on two areas which are major variables in that funding formula, and that is enrollment and free and reduced lunch applications. So in terms of enrollment, obviously the number of students enrolled in a school district will impact the amount of money that you get from the state. But in Exeter West Greenwich, as well as across the entire state of Rhode Island, in every community, there is a decrease in students that are enrolled in the buildings because many families opted for full homeschooling, which is different than distance learning. Distance learning is run by the schools, staffed by teachers, but many families just opted for homeschooling where they become the teacher at home, and those children are disenrolled from the public school. We know that the majority of those families that were new this year for homeschool requests, they all plan on coming back next year. So they were not included in the October 1st enrollment counts, but they will be in our schools next year, and we have to educate them. So that's an issue if the funding formula is not addressed. The other one is the free and reduced lunch applications. So this actually has a very significant impact on the budget. It's a major variable. But what's happened is many school districts, including ours, applied for and received authorization to be able to distribute free meals to all students in the community, all students. No need to fill out a free and reduced lunch application in order to get the free meals. The problem that we have is because we're already giving the free meals, many families, even the families that have always qualified, are just not filling out the applications. And it's those applications that we need to report to the state that they use to plug into the state aid formula. So we have seen a big reduction in our free and reduced lunch percentages. And it's not because we don't have the need, it's because we don't have people filling out the applications. Again, this is an issue that every school district is facing. So if the state aid formula is not adjusted, if there's not some kind of an accommodation made for pandemic-related enrollment and pandemic-related free and reduced lunch application issues, then every school district will receive less money from the state. So we have been working really hard with the legislature, with the governor's office, and with RIDE as an organization, the Superintendent's Association, to advocate for like a hold harmless. And there is some language that's actually been thrown around that would basically eliminate the count from October 1st of this year. And they would use a 3-year average from the prior 3 years, with this year just not included, to determine the funding for schools. That's the latest that we saw today. That would basically stabilize our state aid. And so the anticipated reduction based on the decrease in enrollment and decrease in free and reduced lunch would be eliminated. Again, the pandemic has caused some unanticipated impact, and the state is looking to make some modifications to their formula so that school districts are not hurt. We are also looking at a very significant population shift on top of everything else. As a regional school district, our charter indicates that the towns pay their proportional share based on the percentage of enrolled children from the member towns. What happened this year is when all is said and done, there's a 1.85% shift in the population, and that is negatively impacting Exeter, and it's significant. So I just want to show one example of why that's happened. Okay, so this, I'm not going to go through this. I just want to show you where the numbers came from. This is included every year in the budget development books that are handed out to the school committee members, so you'll all recognize this document. But basically, we report out by grade level and by school the total number of students, and also by town. So you can see that at Lynham, which is just our preschool, it only houses preschool students. In 2015, there were a total of 64 students, 23 from Exeter, 41 from West Greenwich. So we have those numbers all the way up to 2020. What we've noticed is, so for example, in 2019, there were a total of 69 children at Lynham. 2020, only 53 children. So that's a loss of 16 children over the prior year. And we see the same thing happening at Wawaloom in kindergarten. So if you add up the number from Exeter and West Greenwich combined, and then look at this year, we're at 97 this year, for example, and we're at 112 prior year. So that's a loss of 15 students in kindergarten. So in total, there's a 30 student reduction, a 31 student reduction just in preschool and kindergarten enrollment. That is a trend that we're seeing across the state. And it's because those two grade levels are what are called non-compulsory. Families do not need to enroll their children in preschool or kindergarten. And many of the families opted not to send their children because they were concerned given the pandemic and the uncertainty at the start of the school year. I didn't show you on that form too that we had an increase of almost 60 kids that went to homeschooling. So, or 50 or 60 kids that went to homeschooling. So that's a huge drop of children from last year to the current year, again, because of the parental request for homeschool. So I wanted to do an analysis of how that may have impacted the two towns. And again, I would just want to focus here on the preschool and kindergarten because that's it's pretty easy to see what's happened. So I simply took the enrollment numbers from the prior 5 years, 2015 through 2019. I did the total, how many came from Exeter, how many came from West Greenwich. And you can see that these numbers are heavily skewed at the preschool level, heavily skewed in the direction of West Greenwich. They traditionally are, year after year. And I took a 5-year average. So that 5-year average is that we should expect there to be 68 children enrolled in our preschool, 23 from Exeter, again, that's the average, and 45 from West Greenwich. And that means that roughly 33.8% of the children come from Exeter and 66.2 from West Greenwich, again, based on an average. What we actually are seeing is this year only 53 kids enrolled. What we predicted is the 5-year rolling average. Okay, so we're down 15 kids. And if the percentages stayed consistent, of those 15 children, 2 would have come from Exeter and 13 from West Greenwich. So there's a pretty significant drop, and that has impacted the enrollment percentages for the two towns. I did the exact same exercise in kindergarten because that's another grade level where we lost a lot of kids, again, specifically related to the pandemic. And that's based on the conversations that we had with parents. They just didn't enroll because they didn't have to, and they were afraid. So the average would have been an expectation of 113 children. We actually only got 97, so a loss of 16. We have 50 kids enrolled from Exeter. We would have expected 51. And 62 from West Greenwich. We would have expected 62. So again, the loss here is 1 kid from Exeter and 15 from West Greenwich. And therefore the total is a loss of 31 kids. The expected would have been 3 from Exeter and 28 from West Greenwich. So if we simply had enrollment at just those 2 grade levels that was consistent with the prior 5-year average, we would have seen Exeter's percentage not at 48.1%. That's the final count, actual final count based on who's in our schools this year. That would have gone down to 47.4%. So it's a 0.7% difference, which is significant. And then in Exeter, in West Greenwich, it would have gone from 51.9 to 52.6. So again, if we just look at the impact of the pandemic and how that is affecting enrollment, I simply looked at one small group of kids, preschool, kindergarten, and you can see that this accounts for a huge chunk of the large population shift. So, you know, these are things that were, of course, unanticipated, but I think it's worth understanding why the shift has occurred and why it was not predicted previously. You know, it just wouldn't have happened minus the pandemic. So at a minimum, we can predict with a pretty high degree of confidence that at least the preschool and kindergarten enrollment in FY22, as we plan for a normal reentry, that it will swing back toward West Greenwich. So while the shift moves in the direction of Exeter this year, for FY23, when we're developing the budget around this time, we're going to see a shift move back in the direction of West Greenwich, predicting based on the analysis of the numbers over the last 5 years and comparing to current year. So here's where we are at this point. Okay. So there's a lot of information on this page, but I'm really only going to focus on the end portion. You can see the numbers for FY20, exactly what I reported in that first slide, what the school committee approved in May of 2020 for the current school year, the FY21 year, which was a 1.42% increase. That was voted down at the all-day referendum. And so we had to adopt a budget such that the town contributions were level to the prior year. And we know that we have that $34,671 amount that represents the population shift. But other than that, it's a level funded local impact from the prior year. But because we also had an $812,000 reduction from the state, in order for us to get to a place where the local contribution was the same as it was prior year, that operating number had to come down. And that's why it's less than where we were in FY20. Okay, so we are, again, $750,000 below what was approved in May, and we are $250,000 below where we were in FY20. In actuality for us, and the school committee added some money to the, as a revenue for unassigned fund balance. So we originally planned for $100,000, the school committee added $320,900 to help offset. What's actually happened this year is, yes, that we still are operating under the budget that was approved, but we had a couple of adjustments that were made, and that is, you know, a pretty minor reduction in this line. That's English language learner funds, and this is career and technical tuitions. These are kids that come to our school from other districts that we collect tuition for. We had a pretty good chunk of kids that enrolled after the budget was approved. And so we had about $70,000 in additional revenues. And so we included those here and just reduced it from what was put in from the school committee from unassigned fund. But the bottom line is it stayed exactly the same. So that's where we currently are. And now for the current year. So please don't panic because there's changes. I just want to demonstrate a few things through this spreadsheet. But the first initial draft was presented to the school committee in early January. And this number represents all of the requests from all of the schools and all of the departments. It was not analyzed, not reviewed. It's just representative of every request that everybody put into the budget. We know that this is never the number that we end with. This just represents the starting point. So when this number was presented with the new percentages for the towns based on enrollment, Exeter, which went from 46.25% of the share of enrollment to 48.1%, and the increase based on the initial draft of the budget, Exeter was at 10.79% increase, which we know is not feasible. And West Greenwich was at a 2.61% increase. The total increase was at 6.39%, which can never happen. But that's kind of where we started from. I want to just show a couple of things. So first, I'm going to just plug in if we were to level fund from the current year. So 33,136,553. That's the budget that we're operating on right now. So if I plug that in and we go down to the bottom, this is just a demonstration of what the impact of the population shift is. This has nothing to do with requests of the school department. This is simply calculating proportional share based on population. And because the swing was so significant, even if we level fund, Exeter is looking at a 5.02% increase in their contribution, and West Greenwich would be looking at a negative 2.73% increase or decrease in their share. Again, because their population went down, Exeter's went up, and it's significant. And we've experienced this a couple of years before, but this is where we are in the current year. So a lot of the initial increase that I showed you, the impact, it isn't, the full impact is not just the increase in requests. The impact here is just population, okay? So obviously we're not at level funding at this point, but we started at 34,616,726. We continue to go through an analysis line by line, department by department. We are currently, as of today, this afternoon, at this number, 33,862,457. Okay, so we have cut $754,269 from the original requests, and this is the number that we're currently at right now. So we started at 10.79 with those reductions. Exeter is now at 7.85. West Greenwich is at negative 0.11. In addition, the school committee is looking at an additional revenue. We'll be discussing this at the next school committee meeting in February. But that revenue, adding revenue has the same impact as cutting expenses because it reduces what the impact is on the two towns. And we have at least one new career and technical education student who is going to tuition in. I have some unofficial word that we got 2 more applications today, so we'll continue to monitor and adjust accordingly. But that represents an additional revenue as well. And so if I build those revenues in, now we're at 7.15% and negative 0.76%. Overall, the increase is at 2.9%. And this is even though it's 2.9% over the current year, even though the current year is less than what it was the year before. So we're making some really good progress. You can also see here that 2.19% over the FY21 approved budget, 0% over the FY21 requested, So in FY21, the school committee approved in May 33,861,958. We had to cut it, but even this year's is at 33,862,457. It's almost equal to what we were at last year in May. And it's still only 1.42% over where we were in FY20. That's the 2019-20 school year. So that the increase overall, the numbers seem relatively small given the circumstances that we've had over the last couple of years, but the population shift is killing us. And just to demonstrate, even if we just, and this is just for demonstration purposes, but even if we just plugged in the percentages that we would have expected to see if preschool and kindergarten enrollment were consistent with the trend and consistent with what we expected, Exeter would have had a 47.4% and West Greenwich at 52.6%. So I just want to show you what that does so you can see the significant impact of enrollment shifts. So that would bring the number all the way down to 5.59, and West Greenwich would be at 0.58. That's if the just preschool and kindergarten were consistent with the trend and consistent with what was expected. That's not the way that it landed, but that, you can see it makes a big difference here. So that's where we are at the current point. Again, we've put all of those removed positions in order to balance this year's, those 1 year adjustments that we made, they're back in the budget. The SRO is back in the budget. Sports, athletics, all back in the budget. We have made some pretty significant cuts to what was requested. We've built in one retirement that we know of. We'll continue to monitor that. We're continuing to monitor applications to attend our school from out of town to build in additional tuitions. And we also, one of the big things that we will continue to look at is the enrollment numbers specifically at the high school where the children choose their courses and we determine what the needed staff is based on the courses that they've signed up for. So many times that will allow us to make some adjustments and we can experience some additional savings there. We'll also monitor re-enrollment of the kids that went off to homeschool because we've built in all of the teachers that we think we're going to need based on the re-enrollment of the kids that went to a 1 year homeschool approval. However, if some of those children don't return, it is possible that there could be a classroom potentially that we can remove from the budget, the staff for that classroom. So there is room for additional cuts, and we'll continue to monitor and report out at each meeting that we have with the school committee. But our current place is not great, but mostly because of the shift in enrollment.
Okay.
I think
Thank
these
you.
numbers are correct. Yeah. All right, so that's where we currently are, and let me just close this out so I can see everybody. And I'll take questions and discussion.
Okay, good. Thanks, Jim. Okay, so if you mind raising your hand if you have a question, comment. I'm going to recognize Member McFadden. He's had his hand up. Jeremy, if you want to unmute Paul.
So good presentation, Jim.
Thank
So let me just reflect on our history. Let's see, back in 2002, we had about a $9 million school budget. Today, we're at $33 million and change. We had 145 teachers back at that same time. And how I picked 2002 was that was my first year on the school committee. That was also our enrollment high. So today, we don't have 145 teachers like we did in 2002. We have about 157. So it's challenging for all of us because state funding has also been eliminated as well. State funding used to be much higher, and we've lost between $3 and $4 million in state funding overall. The towns, as a result, have to pick up that loss and continue and to make sure that the engine keeps running at the school department. So it's tough. You know, we've lost 27% of our enrollment. That's part of our population dilemma. Yeah, there's shifts going on between both towns every year, but we've also lost a significant amount of our population. In 2002, at our enrollment high, we had 2,208 children. Today, we have about 1,560. I have a question real quick before I proceed further, Jim. Did you include in your spreadsheet for this year's budget request, and I don't think you did, the federal funding, what do we call it, 1, 2, 3, 4 funding? Do you know what those levels are?
No, so federal funding, the grant funding, doesn't impact the operating budget in terms of, the impact on the towns and the request of the towns. That's reported separate. So I've never included that in this presentation.
I understand that, but do you happen to know where that's at, though?
Off the top of my head, no.
800,000?
No, it's a little bit. Say that again. What was your number?
800,000.
It might be around that. When you add in the special education, the preschool, Title I, Title II, all of those, and those grants that we receive, we always do a report. I know that the special education director reports out on her expenses at her end of year presentation to the school committee every year. But those funds are required to be used for supplemental, meaning that they have to be in addition to what is minimally required. You cannot use them to supplant for funds that you're required to have or that you already have in the operating budget. So I couldn't use the federal funds, for example, to say I'm going to pay for a second grade teacher that we need, because that would be supplanting an expense that is already required there. So I know one of the things that's happened, at least since my arrival, is we've used a lot of those grant funds for staffing. So I haven't done an analysis of what happened in 2002 because I was not here. But I know that since I arrived, whenever we've had flexibility with the use of our federal funds, we've looked at how to increase our staff to provide some of the supplemental services, interventions for kids that are in need, social emotional needs, those kinds of things. That's part of the reason why our staffing is a little bit higher. I don't know that it explains it all, but my preference and the team's preference when we meet is that we look at bringing staff in to support needs. That's not a cost to the local towns. However, it does impact the per pupil. It does impact the number of staff that we have, but it's above and beyond, and it's not connected to the operations budget where the responsibility falls on the towns.
I agree. I mean, I believe that we supplement staffing salaries by some of the funds that come in through that category.
Yes.
I just wanted us to realize the total big number that we actually operate, which that's a little bit of a dollar amount. Also, our labor contract costs over 3 years now, not just this year, but over 3 years, there was an increase of about $2 million. That includes the NEA portion and 94. So those two labor contracts combined over 3 years have added to our overall operating budget. We lost $800,000 that we're not getting it back. I don't think we're ever going to get it back. Last year, of course, and I'm sure Jim mentioned that at some point in his presentation. So that's not coming back either. So we are under a lot of stress. I think, there are population shifts, there's coronavirus, and we've lost overall over the last 17 years. I think we're the school department that, as a percentage, lost the largest number of students overall over that period compared to the rest of the state. So, it's a tough nut. And to everyone's agreement, there's a potential coronavirus impact that affected the student shift from West Greenwich to Exeter this year. There's stress from the charter schools that are on the far eastern side of Exeter, which frankly and honestly is only about 75 feet from the Exeter line. And those are kind of attractive because parents don't have to put their kids on the bus to go to, say, Metcalf for maybe 40 or 50 minutes. They can just bring the kids over to where the mobile station is on Route 2 or physically drive them there. And they're expanding. And I think we had, at last count, about 30 students enrolled in the charter schools by URI. It's the best way to describe it. So there's strain there on our student population as well. Mm-hmm. So it's tough. It's tough on the towns, the taxpayers, and once we're past this corona phase, I think we're all hoping that there's kind of there's a pause in these radical drifts in population. I think that does it for me. Thank you.
So just a couple of comments to build off of what Mr. McFadden was saying. I think the point about the number of children that are leaving to go to, in particular, those two charter schools that are right across the street, in some cases, from where the kids live. They're in the Exeter area, but they can basically see their charter school from their yard. We have a lot of kids from the Exeter area that go to those two charter schools. Now, it's important that I get this point across because it kind of describes a little bit of the issue that Mr. McFadden was describing. Yes, we have lower enrollment of kids that are in our schools. However, all of the children who are from our area that are off at the Green School, the Compass School, Kingston Hill, any of the other charter schools, the Rhode Island Nursing Academy, wherever they are, because there are several. All of the children that are enrolled in career and tech centers, the Coventry Career and Tech Center, the Charahoe Career and Tech Center, we have kids in Narragansett, kids at North Kingstown. When you add up the total number of children who are our children, who are going to a school of choice, we are paying a huge chunk of tuition for each one of those kids to leave. We pay. That comes out of our budget. So while our enrollment numbers have gone down, we still have a huge chunk of kids that are not in our enrollment numbers that we have responsibility to pay for. And so, yes, there's been a reduction in total enrollment, but it is not an exact, like, look at this number compared to this number, we went down, because we have a lot more kids going to schools of choice and we have to budget for all of them. So I think Mr. McFadden is right, but there's a qualifier there, and it's just something that everybody should be aware of. And then the other thing is, and this is something I just want to highlight because I don't think I did a good job. If I can bring this back up really quick. So, let me just expand this. Okay. So I'm going to look at what the school committee adopted in May of last year, the 33,861,958, because we know that in order for us to get to where we needed to get to, we actually took out a bunch of salaries, right? We had 3 teachers, their benefits, everything was taken out, not replaced. We had a clerk that we reduced, her benefits were reduced. So a lot of that had to do with staffing. That's where we were in May of 2020. This is where we are right now in January of 2021. We are basically equal. We're within $500 of where I was in May of 2020. And that's with the teachers that were removed for the 1-year adjustment put back in, and all the contractual, whatever the contractual changes were between FY21 and FY22. So when we produce those budget impact statements, the contract impact statements, it is based on all of the staff that exists at the time that the contract was negotiated. But when we're negotiating, we are considering changes in staffing, retirements, impact of retirements, all of those things. We are looking at a second year in a row of a 0% increase in healthcare costs. That really is the result of negotiations. There was some unbelievable progress that was made in healthcare costs. So we're looking at a second year in a row of a 0% increase. So we've built all the contractual changes in, which yes, do represent an increase. But this is where we were in 526. This is where we are in 526 of 2020. This is where we are 128 of 2021. That's with all the staff moved forward and all of their increases built in. The actual impact on salary and benefits is less than what was reported on that impact statement because it did not account for changes in staffing, reductions, retirements, attrition, and it also didn't fully account for the full realization of all of the savings that we experienced in healthcare as a result of the negotiations process. So, again, that figure on paper is accurate, but in actuality and in practice and how it's all played out, it's not exactly accurate. That's all I have to say.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, I don't see any other hands up. So and I can't see a lot of people because, like me, their faces aren't on. So if anybody has any questions, if you want to raise your hand. Everybody's good. I don't want to call anybody out, but if it's kind of nice in a joint meeting to get just a feel for how the Exeter Town Council and West Greenwich Town Council feel about the direction that we're going in. If anybody would like to just kind of give us an indication. I think this year we are going to have a second meeting, joint meeting for the budget, because I think that there's still going to be some changes made on hopefully some progress made on our end. And maybe we can help with that impact with the population shift. But if anybody from West Greenwich or Exeter like to speak on just kind of what you're thinking. No takers. Okay. I guess we'll wrap up. Jim, thank you so much. I think you gave a great picture of where we started, where we're going.
Did you raise your hand? Hello?
I hear somebody, so just, can you
Claudia,
state your name?
Dan Patterson from the Exeter Town Council.
Okay, Dan Patterson. Yep, Dan, go ahead.
Yes, we have a request here. We would like copies of this PowerPoint presentation so we can just, and we love to get it this week for our council meeting Monday night to discuss this. I'm sure we're gonna have another budget hearing on this anyway, correct?
Yeah,
Yes,
we're gonna, we'll have a second joint meeting.
Okay.
You know what? I will print it out along with all the documents that I linked, and I'll drop it off at the Exeter Town Hall tomorrow. Will there be somebody there who can take it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. 9 to 4, correct, Maria? Yeah. Now, a little bit different doing it this year.
Right, I know. I'll do that for you tomorrow at some point in the morning.
Yeah, just call ahead of time because I do know they have the door locked during the day, so,
Okay.
yep, so, all right, thank you.
You're welcome.
What, do I hit this button? The formerly red button. This one.
Okay. I guess we're all set. So if we can have a motion to adjourn, I don't see any other hands up.
Donovan, so moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Member Pasillo seconded. Okay. I'll take a roll call vote. Member Donovan?
Aye.
Member Green?
Aye.
Member Allen? Yep, I see your hand. Diane's an aye. Member McFadden?
He's blocked.
Jeremy, can you unmute him?
I can't unmute people. I can ask them to unmute.
Oh,
and I
sorry.
did.
Okay. Member Pasillo?
Aye.
Member Monroe?
Aye.
Okay, and I'm an aye. We don't have a vote from Member McFadden. Motion carries. Okay, thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining. We'll get an email out regarding a second meeting.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, Kate.
Hi,
Bye,
Caden.
Kaden.
You're welcome.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Kaden.
Bye.
Bye. Be good to your dad.
I will.
Okay.
Good man. Time.
Good night.
Good night. Thanks for being so great while I was on my meeting.